Luke, I am your father. No, no, no. You're not my father. Chewie, help me. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were there. Today's lecture is actually all about our favorite things and what we like to do and how we're manipulated by our favorite things. One of my favorite things of all times is me hanging out in the cockpit with my friends here from Star Wars. Chewie over here. Oh, good Chewie, good Chewie. The girl that I had a huge crush on when I was a teenager, Princess Leia, and the cool bad boy that all girls loved in the 80s, Han Solo, that shows up. I'm here with my original 1977 beat up toys, my Darth Vader, my Luke Skywalker, my original, one of my prized possessions. This is the original Chewbacca. Looks like a Wolfman that shows up. And of course, as I'm on the Millennium Falcon, I had to pack my suitcase of my favorite toys coming from standing outside right here. My favorite toys we'll talk about. Welcome to this episode that actually deals with aesthetics in the modern day world. And thank you very much for letting me live out my Star Wars fantasies. I'm going to share our screen here so you can actually see where we're going with this. And I hope all of you are doing well. Your fantasy might be Harry Potter. Could be all sorts of other things that shows up. Just share the screen here. There we go. I hope all of you are doing fantastically well. So, as I've already introduced, some of my favorite things on the planet is I grew up and I was a product of the 80s, so I am a huge Star Wars nerd. Love Star Wars, particularly the original trilogy. Can't get enough of it. Could watch it almost every day and be perfectly happy within the process. Next to it, my favorite artwork of all time, Van Gogh's Starry Night. Every time I go to New York City, I try to see this artwork, and I literally can spend an hour in front of it just staring. My hero, down below the left, if you don't know that, she won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago. One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. That's Malala, who actually is a Middle Eastern woman who actually stood up, even after being shot in the head, for women to get the right to an education in the Middle East. My favorite TV show, my wife and I have loved this. They're on year 40 now with Survivor, David versus Goliath. I've tried to get on this show numerous times and always been rejected. And it all comes down to what the right-hand column tells us. Your personal aesthetics will impact 80% of basically what you're going to buy and love in the future. I don't buy Star Wars figure anymore, but I still love my vintage set, even though they're beat up and without cape from 1977. Now, your personal aesthetic, you really have no control over. It's a matter of finding out what your brain is hardwired to like in some kind of aspects, and it can be sometimes weird. My favorite color in the world is orange. I love orange. I love the bright coloration that shows up. I like the variations in orange. And so my house has many accents of orange. My wife's favorite color is purple. And so our house also has many accents of purple. And so combined, we have a weird color combination in different parts of the house because we have orange and purple together. We've been married for 25 years, so we are coexisting within this process. My wife's favorite book, all the way on the right, in the orange and purple, you can see with the purple wall behind it, is Don Quixote. She has a Don Quixote collection. Right above our piano, I actually love African art. My specialty is African art. You can see even there I have a Yoda t-shirt on within the process, which actually wasn't planned. And so our large dining room area is actually all in African art from different people I've met and worked with over the years. And so we have both of these kind of collections going on. My daughter loves musical theater and Disney. So this is her bedroom. You can see her color palette and what she likes. But these are all Broadway plays she's either seen either on Broadway or most of them traveling around off-Broadway theaters that shows up. And she loves it so much, she's about to go off to college to study musical theater. My son loves video games, debate, and soccer. And I'll brag on my little guy. See the trophy behind him. He was the middle school national debate champion about a year and a half ago. And now is in high school, doing very well and competing around the country in debate when we're not under lockdown for Corona. But all of these things, your personal aesthetics, your likes, will impact 80% all of your future spending. So the sooner you get it under control and know what your personal aesthetics are, the better it is actually, because you will not buy all those items like I did that you really just don't love. My wife and I, we love to travel. And so every year we can afford, but every year we try to take a business trip somewhere. And we go and we try to explore some other area of the artwork or some other area of the world. When we go, we always buy one family artwork for the house that kind of reminds us of the trip or something that we did. We have a Native American drum for when we went to Native American reservations in South Dakota. The other thing we buy is we always buy a fancy rock, which you can see right here with the cursor, and we put that on a pin, and those become our doorknob handles. So we kind of think about the different places we've been as we move around our house, because they're different. There are our kitchen cupboard habits. All the way on the right, we went to China for a business trip for me a couple of years ago, and this is a tripod goo wine pourer that you heat up over open coals, and each one of those legs represent a different aspect of family. And so for us, that was a nice thing that we actually keep on our dining room table for every day. So again, our personal aesthetics come into play. Now, your personal aesthetics can also be ridiculous. One of the things that shows up is I am a product of the 80s. So any idea from this closet, which is luckily not ours, can you imagine what my ridiculous purchase was? Because we have all bought that one item of clothing that we weren't sure of in the store, brought it home, and now it lives in our closet. It might still even have the tags on it. Any idea, as me, as a product of 80s, from you knowing me a little bit, what my ridiculous purchase was? It was this. I am ashamed to say the Michael Jackson Thriller and Beat It kind of jacket that he actually wears over and over. He also wears it a little bit in Billie Jean. And so this is the one thing that I actually have that for whatever ridiculous purchase, I don't even think I ever wore it once. It's still in the closet. So my wife would laugh at me if I even took it out. My wife's ridiculous purchase is even worse. She actually has really a product of the 80s, but also the late 70s. And so her ridiculous purchase was the Mork from Orc suspenders from Robin Williams. You can see them here in action. If you've never heard of the show Mork from Orc, I would absolutely, it's Robin Williams at his best. A lot of the show is actually ad-libbed. And so we all have that. Now, before you get too high and mighty, like, I've never done that, you probably have. Are any of these things in your closet? Do you have a Harry Potter for whatever house that you actually are in Gryffindor? Do you have the I'm the shit poop t-shirt? Do you have the Thanos power arm that he holds with the power stones? We probably all have one of these ridiculous purchases. That's our personal aesthetics. And so one of the things that shows up as we think through personal aesthetics and as we move on to aesthetics is the idea of grit. Grit is the idea that when someone kicks you or when someone does something that's negative, it really does have a negative impact. What do? Do you fold up shop, or alternatively, do you go and do you strive to make that better within the process? And the question I have for all of you, if you want to see the actual TED Talk, this is by Angela Duckworth, one of the leading scholars in the world on the grit test. But when we look at some of the things that Fortune 500 companies want, or what Disney wants in employees, you will often get asked this question on a job interview. So write it down and think about it. You should have an answer for this for every job interview you go on, particularly as you get more professional and get your associates and your bachelors and are applying for a job in the arts. And this will be true for outside of the arts as well. It's tell me about a time when you failed and what you did about it. It asks you to admit that you have failed, and we all have, and to reflect upon, did you do anything about it? Basically, did you show grit? So this week, each of you is going to take the grit score that you're going to give to me. You're going to take this angeladuckworth.com grit scale. I sent it out via email. It will also be in your syllabus. It's also in the online board up for your in your week work for under this week for aesthetics. So take it, but honestly take it. It's very short. It will take you less than 5 minutes. Maybe it takes you 5 minutes if you really think about it. But it's supposed to be a true reflection on where you stand with grit. What do you do when things don't go right? Do you pack it up and say the world's against me? In which case your grit score is going to be very low. Or do you actually strive through it? And so one of the things that shows up is that as Fortune 500 companies want this, and sometimes they're even testing people on it, look at a couple of the study 1s and study 2 below us about grit. Freshman cadets entering U.S. Military Academy in West Point as of July 2004, they did a grit scale. They also do all sorts of amazing things. I mean, these are West Point. This is about the toughest school in the planet to get into, tougher than Harvard. So they include SAT scores, class rank, leadership, physical aptitude. Despite this, the cadets that did the best, even if they didn't have the highest SATs, the highest class rank, the highest leadership, the cadets that did the best actually had the highest grit scores. Why? Because when things went awry, when things did, they knew how to actually come back. Now, here in Miami versus many of the other colleges that I've worked for or have worked with students from, our grit scores are generally very high. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that poverty actually does help improve your grit score. And we have a number of students that are living in poverty or close to poverty or have lived in poverty. Immigration is one of the most difficult things to do on the planet, particularly if there's a language barrier going from a Spanish speaking to an English speaking or to whatever speaking nation that's not your indigenous tongue. And so we have a number of people and families who have gone through that. So that aptitude for grit. Now, the nice thing about grit is you can improve it. The next time something comes up that doesn't go well, whether it's academics, whether it's something at your job, you can fill it in all sorts of ways. Stick it out and try to make it better. The more times you do that, the more you will invent or kind of grow your grit score. A maximum grit score is at 4.9. That's the highest that you can have on a 5-point scale. The lowest one they record is a 2.5. So if you're in that 3 range or below, take grit seriously because it is something you'll have to develop. The nice thing is once you develop that grit score, you almost never lose it. So even if you shy away from a particular activity that you don't feel like that invested that you want to go back and do, you'll still know you have the skills. So when it comes up that, hey, I've got to do this for my job, you've already developed that skill. That's why we have you take the grit score to make sure that you are ready to compete on a national market as we start to get you ready along with critical thinking, creativity, the 4 C's from the Fortune 500 company we'll talk about all semester long. Now, when we talk about aesthetics, so far we've talked about the bottom half, your personal aesthetics. That's an analysis of how an artwork makes you think and feel about an artwork. This makes me feel happy. I really love to kind of think about my childhood, playing with my sister who was 2 years younger. We used to play Star Wars figures together. I can't really evaluate that experience. And so for an aesthetic analysis, what we're going to be doing in our class is the above material. And that is an aesthetic analysis is an analysis of how an artist attempts to make the viewer, listener think and feel about an artwork in cultural, historical context. So we could take that same Chewbacca original figure and we could say, all right, what did Ralph McQuarrie, the original designer, concept artist of Star Wars, what did he want us to think about? Is this a fearful image that shows up in the Wolfman? Is this more, is it soft and subtle like we get? Is it more like a teddy bear? Is it scary? Is it large? We can look at all those things and talk about what he's trying to get across as an artist. But that has nothing to do with my personal experience, is my love for this as a child because I fell in love with the story and with the characters then. So in aesthetics then, with the Van Gogh here, is an analysis of how an artist attempts to make the viewer, listener think and feel about an artwork in cultural and historical context. So one of the things you're going to have to know is a little bit about the artist in many cases, or what they were trying to communicate so you have an idea of what you're looking at. So looking at something like Van Gogh's Starry Night, we would need to know a little bit about the background, right? We would need to know a little bit about, all right, is this his traditional style of using these more swirly brush strokes? Was he going through any mental illness when he was doing this? Is there a reason he actually uses blues and yellows, unlike other people have used blues and yellows before? And so the more information that we can tease apart and try to figure out, the better our aesthetic analysis. So in order to figure one out, let's look at this. If you don't know, this is Klimt's The Kiss, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It's one of the most famous artworks of 20th century art, kind of breaking with the canon of realism. And so when we actually think about an aesthetic analysis, we need to analyze or do an analysis of all of the decisions an artist made in the creation of an artwork. So let's think through 100 questions that we can from The Kiss. And then we need to answer why for each one. Why? That's ultimately how we get to the message, which leads us to the aesthetic analysis. And I'll run through those questions in a moment. So for example, why do we have a heterosexual couple here? Why is the man larger than the female? 2. Why is the male image within the process has an extended neck? 3. Why are the two bodies blending together? 4. Why is there gold leaf in the background? 5. Are they laying down or kneeling? 6. Why are they kneeling on the edge of what appears to be a cliff with flowers? 7. Why is the man and the woman both have different colors of flowers in their hair? Is that decoration, or is that more about erotic love that's coming out? 7. 8. What about the squares and the much more rectilineal shapes on the side of the man versus the floral patterns on the woman? That's 9. Why is the male figure more defined and the female figure less defined? 10. And you just keep going through and then trying to answer those questions. Well, why? Well, why? Well, why? As best as you possibly can till eventually you get the message. That's really what aesthetic analysis is. And that's the key. It's an analysis. We can do the same thing with Edvard Munch's The Scream. Why these particular colors? Why is there, just dots for eyes and nose and not a lot of realism? Why does the banister in the front and the back not match up? Why do the people walking to and from not have a head or not have a leg? Are they a couple, but why are they going this opposite directions? Is this a boat in the middle of water? I don't know. Why make these very brutal marks with chalk right here on top of the paint? Why have the lovely swirls in the sky in those particular colors, right? And so we go through all of those different. Why does the feature here have no feature? It's almost a curvilinear body. Why does the individual have basically glove mitts for hands rather than for hands? Why is he looking at the audience member? And then we actually go through when we try to answer all of those. That's actually how we do an aesthetic analysis. The hardest part about doing aesthetic analysis then, as I mentioned before, is understanding the world from an artist's perspective. What is the artist seeing, thinking, feeling within the process? And if you look at the bottom question, that's what makes aesthetic analysis pretty interesting. What makes humans amazing creatures is this idea that we have second order thought. This is the basis of empathy. And so if you don't know what first order thought and second order thought, let me give you an example. First order thought is when you see a ball that's coming towards your head and you move and say, I think I should catch that, so it doesn't hit. Second order thought is then was like, hey, I wonder where that ball came from. Third order thought, I wonder if they threw that ball at me intentionally when I wasn't looking. Fourth order thought, I wonder if there's something going on in that person's head that made them think they want to throw the ball at my head, which I should probably catch so they don't get hit in the head. And the humans can do this up to sixth and seventh order thought. We can ascribe difference. It's why social media for us is so dangerous. Because when you read a text generally, unless there's an emoji, has no emotion at all. Or if it says JK for just kidding at the very end, or laugh out loud. If it has one of those LOL, if it has one of those things, maybe we read a little into it. But otherwise, you don't get the emotion. You look at it and you're thinking, wow, are they making fun of me? Why, do they really like me? I wonder if they talked to that person who said that they didn't really like me the other day. And we start running through craziness in our head, which really can hurt with our social relationships, but also with our own mental health. We are the only creature so far on Earth that we know that actually has more than second order thought. And that's what art is. Art is the manipulation of what others are trying to do to manipulate us. That's already a second order to a third order thought, but it's also nicely the basis of empathy, because you can feel like, oh, this person was trying to do this. Yes, it didn't work out, but they were trying to be nice. So you can attribute positive attributes. But unfortunately, as humans, if you know social media, Facebook, we're always often attributing that negative aspect. And that's why one of the reasons we can definitively say you were currently live in the most oppressed generation the world has ever seen. That's just what we, from all the studies that have been done, a lot of this social media, fear of being left out, FOMO, fear of missing out. People put the best things about themselves up on Facebook. So you see the best and the highlights. You don't get to see the worst, which generally people hide. So you think their life is just this wonderful thing that happens. That's a major issue that happens as we're thinking about aesthetics. So how do we do an aesthetic analysis? Not a personal aesthetic analysis. I can't evaluate how you feel because it comes with your own personal experiences. This is how an artist feels and tries to make us feel. So the first thing is, what is the message of the artwork? What is the artwork trying to say? Note, the confusion that often happens is we often conflate the message with the subject, and that's not right. The message of Star Wars is not a space fight. It's the idea of the battle between good versus evil. Or Harry Potter is the same thing. And what allows Harry Potter's goodness to win out, or the goodness? It's the love of his friends and of his mother that shows up. The second question, what is the emotional impact that the artist is trying to get across? Emotion comes before intellect. We feel and then we think based upon how we feel. The emotion happens almost immediately. That's why we have things such as road rage. It's not an intellectual response, it's an emotional response that we then try to justify. The third part is, what is the intellectual impact that the artist is trying to get across? And finally, how does the artist do this? What are the art skills? What are they manipulating in order to get those ideas across? Are they manipulating line, form, color, shape, texture, all of these things that can be manipulated? So if you look at these particular artworks up here, I've already given away one of them, the Harry Potter. What is the message of the artwork? If you think about it, what's the message of Toy Story? Or what's the message of the Avengers movies? Any of the movies, they all basically have the same message. All right, so the message of Toy Story is what? It's a look into reality that basically friends can actually help you when things are not going well. That's the message. You need Buzz and Woody as the characters to actually get to that, but you could do other characters to make the same message about friendship and the saga with Ron, Hermione, and Harry Potter himself. The Avengers series is the same thing. It's all about a team group that if the team that comes together for goodness can overcome the most evil in the world. And so if you'll notice looking through movies, we have a very stylized message that shows up in movie after movie. We're going to see that in the arts too. It was invented by Peter Paul Rubens, the idea of good and evil. What is the emotional impact then? How are they pulling on your heartstrings? How are they trying to get you actively involved? You know, do you feel bad for Woody when he gets thrown out of the toy because there's this new kind of kid on the block? Some of you might have felt that own emotion if you were the eldest and baby brother or baby sister came along and much more time was being spent with them. So it's a natural human emotion to feel that aspect of left out and feel empathy, sympathy for those particular individuals. That leads us to the intellectual impact. Hey, that impacted me. I understand how Woody felt. And then finally, how does the artist do that? The artist does that by manipulating. They can manipulate color, line, form, shape, texture, excuse me, and in film, they can do it through movement. These things that the artist gets to move, basically, these things are called the elements of design. They are the basic elements, the basic principles, the foundations of making art. All artists get to manipulate the color. Even if it's black and white, that's a manipulation of not using color. They get to manipulate the style, the quality, the shape of line. They get to imitate and actually use the style of form. The scale, is it big, small, medium? How do we categorize that? And the texture. I will mention texture. We will not deal with that much in Art History 1. That will be much more in Art History 2 concept that comes up. So as we look at line is very simple. So one-dimensional figure that an artist used to create forms, from diagonal to vertical to horizontal. No, we are not going to use all these different terms within art class to begin with, but note that they are out there. You'll be using them throughout your art career, and particularly after you take color and composition. 2D design, in other words, for graphic designers, color and composition if you're not a graphic designer or an animator. If you look and go to the beach, when you walk onto the beach and see that beautiful sunset, the first thing you do is you look out at the horizon line. And then virtually everyone moves their head from one side to the horizon line to the other side of the horizon line. Go to the beach and watch people. They almost never break that horizon line and then turn around and look at the giant skyscrapers and buildings behind them. They come back to that settled aspect of the horizontal line. And really the only thing that ever blocks that horizontal line is if there's someone that you're attracted to that's actually on the beach as well, then you break that line. But otherwise, you don't really break that horizontal line as you're scanning. So what is a horizontal line about? As you scan across and everyone has the same emotion. The horizontal line then is about balance, order, and calm. So the horizontal line, when you see it, is about balance, order, and calm. When companies do logos, they use this reference. Note, when you want someone to protect your money, you're going to want them to have horizontal lines in their logo. That is because it's about balance, order, and calm. You don't want them to take risky investments. You want them to be overly energetic. There's going to be a balance, ordered, and calm that shows up in money management, right? We feel safer within that environment. We feel safer when we're at the beach or in these long vistas. It's just us out in nature. It naturally calms our body down. So if you suffer from anxiety, from depression, one thing they do say, go to the beach, go out and actually spend time in nature. Look at those horizontal vistas. There is an impact that actually helps on your own mental health. And I should mention, when we talk about line, what I'm teaching you about line is true for all cultures around the world. It matters not if it's 5th century Tang China, or whether it is, actually that would be 8th century Tang China, or whether it happens to be Mesoamerica during the Aztecs, or today in New York City. So then, what's a vertical line do? When you come to a vertical line, what do you naturally do? Your eye goes up and you're looking around. So when you go to New York City and you see these giant buildings, some buildings are so tall that the cloud line hides part of the building, and then the building soars out of the cloud line. They're that large within the process. And so what these large scale vertical lines do, they emphasize aspiration, growth, and power. When you walk into a church, Jesus is just generally not at the level you are. And yet in the crucifixion, that's exactly the level he would be, because the Romans wanted to scare you into believing and seeing how awful a torture this was. Today, we put Jesus very high up on the altar of a church when we do go to church, because it's about power. He's more important, and that location elevates us to power. Walking around New York City, there's actually a t-shirt you can buy that says, I have tourist neck. Basically is when your neck gets locked up because you're looking at such tall buildings, because they're double the size of what we have in Miami. Diagonal lines are up next. Diagonal lines, like every other line, has a connotation that shows up. And those connotations are, it draws your eye into space. Think about driving down a road at night, and the diagonal lines are not really diagonal, they're straight across, but at a distance they look like they're going diagonal, draws you into the picture. So that's one. The other one, they connote energy, the idea of action. And so if you want to show an action pose, or if you want to show someone in action, go watch the movies. They don't stand and fight like this. They're fighting at an angle. And so it's coming at you, and you're moving, you're ducking, you're bobbing, particularly in a three-dimensional movie. So we're going to use that all the time in ads as well. Think about the ads that you most know about that are very effective to get you up and doing something. Chances are those ads have diagonal lines. Look at the Nike Factory Just Do It logo. Look at that logo coming out of you, right? It's literally at that diagonal cross. It's coming down at you, connoting action. If it was a flat line, it would basically say, hey, let's take a nap. If it was at this, hey, it's all about growth, let's climb a tree. It's not. It's about hard work and energy that will bring you to that plateau of where you want to be in activity. The Mountain Dew ad on the right is ridiculous because there's diagonal lines for fun everywhere. They so overuse diagonal lines, they're really making a spoof of actually doing it, but it's very effective. Note Adidas, Puma. They all have diagonal lines as part of their logo. Why? Because those are companies about energy. It's not take a nap. It's let's get off our ass and go do something. And the last line that we're going to at least look at today as part of our conversation is going to be the lovely curvilinear line. The curvilinear line we don't see a lot in ads, and if we do, they're for natural worlds. What a curvilinear line does is it gives control to someone else. Because a curvilinear line basically says, I am giving you some freedom. You can start where you want, you can end where you want, you can tour around where you want, you are actually in control. And that's why Van Gogh's Starry Night is such an appealing artwork, because Van Gogh knows what a powerful artwork this is. He knows you're roughly going to end at the same spot, but he lets you explore wherever you want. So if you do an experiment, and this is an interesting experiment, I think, if you close your eyes for a moment, when I tell you to open your eyes and just start following which line, wherever you want to go. Let your eyes just roam, because Van Gogh's opening it up. Okay, open your eyes. Now about half of you, and only half of you, will choose this spiral right here. Some of you will choose the brightness of the star, the saturated color. Some of you will choose this swirl. Some of you will choose this. That's not true of an ad. In an ad, we guide your eye through line and color to exactly what we want you to look at, exactly when we want you to look at, so we can manipulate you so you think you're actually getting to a message when really you're being told the message. That's the difference between graphic design ads versus graphic design art, where you really do have much more flexibility within the process. Is it commercial art, or is it art which can be more open-ended? Now, when we do a line, one of the best ways to figure it out is to do a line drawing. So here's a very simple contour line drawing of the screen. You can also do one of here. So in class, we will be doing this line drawing here, so you can actually see how the lines play out, because the lines and the colors from Van Gogh, they don't match up. The color gives us one message. The lines give us another message in Starry Night. And that is largely because Van Gogh is an untrained artist. He doesn't go to art school, which means he doesn't he doesn't learn all of the rules of art. So he breaks a bunch of rules of art, which we probably not tell him to break. And because he breaks the right one at the right moment as he's learning how to paint and create artwork, he not stumbles, but kind of finds out a new way of expressing himself called Expressionism, which is the distortion of reality to get your ideas, your emotional state across. And that's exactly what he's doing. So let's do a 2-minute or 3-minute line drawing of Van Gogh's Starry Night. And you can pause it here for a moment. Here's my contour line drawing then of Starry Night. Very quick, just to get the overarching, but you can see where the circles are, where the curves are versus the straight lines. So in this case, you can literally see the curves are, that's right, all the elements of nature. And note they dominate and they're powerful and they're much larger. What is the straight lines? The part controlled by humanity, the part that would be safe, but look how small and dainty it is compared to the massive powers of fate that shows up within his artwork. One of the great masters to do, this is a Goya, so one of the great masters of linear drawing, and this is considered one of the greatest linear drawings, linear paintings ever, is that what is the message here? Look at all the different lines that show up. Note, you have the individuals that are about to shoot with the implied lines of the guns and the bullet, about to shoot someone in a Christ-like pose that's white and innocent, that has no weapons, people crying behind him. The guy right next to it that just got shot fell down in a Christ-like pose. So here we really do have tragedy that shows up. Goyo, once he creates this particular style within painting called the Romantic style of painting, he's one of the leading painters of this particular genre, really does promote this. And so we see a lot of faceless enemies and a lot of science fiction films that are based upon this particular artwork. The next element design that we want to look at is form. Form is pretty simple. It's the shape or structure of an object, person, landscape that can get the idea across. And so, for example, in the Mona Lisa image here, that Mona Lisa is the shape of Mona Lisa. It's the shape of a woman. We're probably looking at the female form. We're probably looking at beauty. In the one on the right, one of my favorite artworks of all time, called The Gardens of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, which we'll see at the beginning of art history too. It's a Northern Renaissance artwork. One of the things that shows up is that there's a number of different human forms and kind of other forms that show up that are all about marriage and all sorts of different aspects that show up with in terms of kind of biochemical things that have been used in the chemistry lab. The elements of design, remember, now that we know them with line and color, or at least with line, we're going to start manipulate them. And later on in the semester, you are actually going to manipulate and create a new resume based upon what we now know on how to manipulate line. Remember, everyone has horizontal lines in a resume. These are the main lines that show up. They're about calm, balance, and order. Everyone wants to have them in their resume. You're going to have vertical lines. That's the columns that are oriented. That's about power and growth. The key for you is how do you incorporate now, not curvilinear lines, because we don't want to give them control when they're looking at your resume. You want to control what they look at when they look at it, because you only get about a minute for them to look at your resume and scan through it. But what about those vertical lines? Because vertical lines are all about energy. You want to show that the power and aspiration is not just for power and aspiration. it's because you are energetic and a go-getter. So we're going to do that by indenting some of the lines. So we're going to teach you how to do this in a couple of weeks. So we're going to use what we're learning to manipulate others. That's what art is. There's no reason not to do it on a resume. All right. After form, then, the next one up for us is color. Color is the use of different values for an emotional impact and or to guide the viewer's eye through an artwork. And so the elements of design then, line works for everyone. It's hardwired into the brain no matter where, what time you're from. Color is culturally determined. So if you're looking at the Western world, the world of Europe, Australia, the United States, and the modern day world, where colonizers went into parts of Latin America and made it much more look like European culture, then the color elements will work. If you go to China, the color elements will actually be different. For example, you would never see or very seldom see a woman get married in red here in the United States of America. And yet that's the preferred color to get married in China. Now, in terms of color terminology, we have two different types of color terminology we want to use. We have two basically different primary colors even. And that is because early on, before we had digital, we didn't have a subtractive primary color. We only had an additive primary color. And the additive primary color scale is still the dominant primary color scale because it works in paint, it will work in sculpture, ceramic glazes, and that is when we have blue, yellow, and red. The three colors basically that you can make all other colors from. In a graphic or animation world, we have subtractive primary colors that a TV now works off of. So if you take magenta, yellow, and cyan, you can see you can make all the other colors from those three. So we actually do have two sets of primary colors in the modern day world. The other three concepts that we want to have here, I'll move my video out of the way so you can see them now. There we go. Next to the primary color are those things called analogous colors. Analogous comes from the word analogy, which means like one another. Those are colors that are very close to one another on a color wheel. So your blues, your greens, your yellows, your oranges, and your reds that happen to be up here. So anything that is within 1, 2, or 3 pi spaces of one another would be your analogous colors. Your complementary colors are going to be the ones that are directly opposite one another. So if you have a primary color, it's going to be the mix of the other two primary colors. So yellow, the complementary color is purple because it's a mix of blue and red. So what would be the primary color for blue? Well, that would be a mix of yellow and red, which would give us, and that would be orange. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. The hue is the perfect shape of the color. So it's the nanometer wavelength that shows up. That's considered the perfect primary color. The tint is when you add white to that hue, and the shade is when you add black to the hue. When we take two primary colors and put them in the same artwork together, we basically are blending energy and calm together. And that's exactly what Van Gogh does in Starry Night. It's why we have such an active painting with the active lines, but that blue is so calming. So it actually ends energy and calm together. Two primary colors blending it together. And again, to get action. This is a woman, a milkmaid that's pouring milk. And there's this activity like it's much more busy than what we would expect it to be for such a subtle picture. It's because of the color variation. When we take two muted primary colors and we add the secondary accents, it forces your eye all the way around the image because we have such saturation and darkness between those. Our eye actually flows to look at everything in the image. Even the curvilinear lines, note here, help guide you, but they're very short. So it guides you to a very specific spot that guides you to another curvilinear line in a very specific spot. It's not like Van Gogh where he basically frees up and you can look anywhere you want for as long as you want. So those analogous colors, the feature is they blend together. They form a unified whole. And so if we look at the artwork of Turner in the upper left-hand corner, we have a sunset. We interpret it as a sunset. Monet's water lilies, they kind of all blend together. It gives us this peaceful, serene environment. The lower half of the screen by Edvard Munch in the lower right-hand corner, we get a much more peaceful without that blood red sky, which is really jarring much more on the complementary realm. Other beautiful analogous colors, again, blending them together. And you can see the lovely color palette over here of Monet's water lilies. analogous colors here, also in Klimt. Even though it's high saturation, they're all not far off from the color wheel. So we are in actually pretty good stead as we're rolling around here, looking at analogous colors. Complementary colors, particularly when we put them in a digital format, wow, look at the right. Some of those actually hurt your eye to look at. If you look at the Marc Chagall, the painting all the way on the left, which has the green head right next to the bright red, those complementary colors, they're so jarring that our eye actually looks at both colors independently, not together. We see the same thing in some of Van Gogh's artwork below. That is actually an area in a cafeteria that he used to go and hang out. And the green of the pool table and the red of the wall is discombobulating. You wouldn't want to spend that long at that particular bar unless it's the only bar in town or cafeteria. When we put these colors really close together, you will note that there's no line around those colors on your right, some vibrating color combinations. Your eye is basically going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's seeing green, red, green, red, green, red, blue, orange, blue, orange, blue, orange, blue, orange. It can't actually process both colors at the same time. And so it does persistence of vision. It runs back and forth, and as such, your eye needs a shortcut, so it draws a little vibrating line in between them. You can see that probably in the cyan and the yellow, about halfway down the screen. That is a hard combination to look at. That's why we don't make stop signs along these lines. Your eyes wouldn't want to look at it. Human evolution then, basically for complementary colors, has made it almost impossible for us to see complementary colors. And that is because complementary colors are often 200 nanometer wavelengths apart. And so our eyes don't have the functionality to be able to jump back and forth between those 200 nanometers to show up. And so that makes it much harder for them to see, like the budding of flowers on the green. We really are going back and forth. It's a science-based concept for us. And basically, it leads us to the human eye. How do we see color? The way that we see color is that we see little dots of colored packets. There are no lines in the universe. The lines do not exist. Lines are drawn in by your eyes to make sense of a world of where the chair ends, where the desk ends. And we can go into an entire physics and chemistry. Most of the space that you hear at a table, like when I hit the table, it sounds hard, but most of what I'm hitting is actually still air. They're just so tightly packed. There's a lot of material that happen to be there with electrons and protons. So what happens when light comes and hits an object? Light, let's say it hits that banana. Light comes and it hits the banana. The banana absorbs certain frequencies of light, and it rejects or reflects other frequencies of light. And so the ironic question is, what color is a banana? The true answer is a banana is every color besides yellow. The banana absorbed all of the other colors, making it that color combination. The color that got rejected is the yellow color. That's the yellow color that we see. So it's a very counterintuitive argument. So evolution has basically made it so that women can see far more colors than men. We talked about this in prehistoric art. Women can see way more shades of red in particular than men. And that is because, as you look at the left-hand column, the gene that allows us to see the color red is on the X chromosome, of which men only have one X chromosome. Women have two X chromosomes. So women see crimson, maroon, cardinal, ruby, scarlet. Men see red. But men very much see motion much better than women, probably because of our hunting. Women needed to be able to identify what was really powerful, ripe food when they were going as hunter and gatherers. Men were out hunting, so they need to be able to see motion within the process. So if color names were a guy, you would have red, purple, pink, orange, yellow, green. Look at all the different maraschino, cayenne, maroon, plum, eggplant, grape, orchid. My wife actually sees colors far better than I do. Some women actually have 4 receptor cells in their eyes. They can see 100 million colors. Most humans have 3 color receptors, and we can only see 1 million colors. Still impressive. So complementary colors separating the world. Note the red and the green of the dress of the upper left-hand corner. We talked about the Van Gogh image before. We see that separation of the world. The other element that works for everyone around the world is scale. And scale is all about that size matters, whether something is big or small. Now, just to put this in perspective, look at all the images that I put in front of you. Those are all to scale. And so if we imagine that the creation of Adam from the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, the background image, it is actually 20 feet high and 42 feet wide. That means that in perspective, everything else that you see is exactly that size. So the fountain right here would be exactly that size, about 2 feet. The Mona Lisa's 2.5 feet. This one is about 5.5 feet. This one is 14 feet. This one is 18 feet tall, and about 6 feet wide. So these are all aspects. So when you look at it, size will matter because it tells you something about how the artist wants you to approach an artwork. Is Jesus huge and high and overwhelming because he's unapproachable, or is he just more powerful than the rest of it? What is the artist trying to convey? Most people are shocked when they see the Mona Lisa the first time because it's tiny. It's about the size of my shirt, the size of the shirt that you're wearing. And that is because it was meant to be an intimate portrait. It wasn't meant to be seen from far away. It was meant for someone's bedroom as a portrait of their lovely wife that they were supposed to see. So it's supposed to be very intimate. So you can get close and personal. It's right about life size of what a woman would have been from midsection up. So what you're going to do then is you're going to perform an aesthetic analysis of this particular artwork. You're going to take the scale, the size, and I should mention the scale is about 6 feet wide and about 5 feet tall. About 4 feet tall, sorry, 6 feet wide, 4 feet tall. So it's not overwhelming. It's about the size of a regular size window. And what I want you to do is figure out what is the message of the artwork? What is the artist trying to say? It's not Starry Night, that's the subject. Why depict the Starry Night in this way? Why have the winds whipping around that way? Why no light on in certain buildings? Why no light on in the church? If it was this windy out, like a hurricane wind or tornado wind, where would you go? Why do we have this weird sharp tree right here blocking us in the foreground? Why do we have organized, very straight lines for the town? Why do we have curvilinear lines overwhelming the city? And all of these have to be figured out. When you finally figure it out, which we did in class, this is really on some level Van Gogh telling us that the church, when nature's out of control and we need God to help us because we have no control over nature or the powerful impact that happened in a hurricane and a tornado and a mining accident. Note the church is closed with the windows drawn, there's no lights. God's not there to help us. Van Gogh actually painted this from, or at least started painting it and drawing it, sketching it out from the window of an insane asylum, Saint Remy, where he actually has this. And Artistry 2 will look through that story a little bit more. And so when artists use these things, they create visual representation styles of the world. So they will manipulate the design elements to create abstraction, classical, expressionism, idealism, naturalism, non-objective, realism, and theatricality. And so they are color coordinated for a reason, which we'll show you in a couple of moments. But no, we're going to go through each one individually. So when we look for these abstractions, artists manipulate these various tools in order to create visual representation styles. That style can be realistic, which is probably in most artwork, but in the 20th century, we start using abstraction. We'll just go through them alphabetically. Abstraction is the simplifying real-world content to retain only the information that is relevant. It's really rare until modern art. And so here you can see that horse in the center is abstracted. The light bulb or the sun is abstracted. The human heads and bodies, they're abstracted. You can still recognize what they are, but they're simplistic drawings, almost like cartoonish drawing to get a message across. And that's all abstraction is. Abstraction is like playing Pictionary. In Pictionary, if I tell you to draw a house, what are you going to draw? A square with a triangle on top. Perfect. That's not a house, that's a prison. Where's the windows, where's the doors? How are people getting in and out? A rare type of art form, which is a more recent discovery, is this art form. This is called non-objective. Non-objective is when you use art to create non-representational art or concepts. The art might be about spirituality. The art might be just about the color orange. The art might be about anger, but it's not about any physical object. It's not about Apple. It's not about, a representation of a building. It literally is about some particular type of concept. This we don't invent until the 20th century, and so we're not going to see this until art history 2. It's very rare even today. The other two visual representations of style that we'll look at, One is classical and one is idealism, and they are directly linked. And that's because classical, let's start off with idealism. Idealism is the artistic interpretation of a perfect world where the artist corrects the imperfection of reality. So if you were, excuse me, if you were to go to a beach and you wanted to make a beautiful picture of a beach, you take the picture of a beach and then you have to Photoshop, right? Any clouds we're going to get rid of. Garbage we're going to get rid of. A dead fish we're going to get rid of. Unattractive people we're going to get rid of. We're going to get rid of anything that is not perfect. Classicism does the same thing, only in the classical world. And so we're going to see a lot of absolutely gorgeous Olympic type nude sculptures that show up like we see all the way on the left, which is Polyclitus the spear bearer. And so we're going to see different versions of this as it shows up later on. Naturalism and realism. This is the pair you're most likely to screw up. So let's start off with realism at the bottom. Realism is the depiction of real life events and people, with the background being optional. You don't need the background for realism. So note the left on the sculpture where there is no background. That is realism. That is a real individual doing a real thing, kind of announcing himself as this heroic figure coming back. On the middle image, or the middle section, where we see American Gothic, man with the pitchfork, that is realism and naturalism. Because naturalism has recognizable imagery that is realistically depicted in nature. So basically, it's realism plus a background. Realism plus a background is naturalism. Now here's the weird concept. If I was to take the image on the left, that Roman sculpture of Augustus, and I was to put him on the moon, I would still have realism. He's a real person, real life event, real people. I don't need a background. So I still have realism, but I don't have naturalism. And that becomes part of the issue. That's the one that's most likely to get screwed up because of the background. The other two that show up, we're going to see these a lot in art history 2 and not so much in art history 1. One is going to be expressionism. Expressionism is when we communicate heightened emotions rather than realism. So we basically abstract realism to get to heightened emotions. So it's very rare to have expressionism and realism because they're counterintuitive to one another. Theatricality is the same thing. It's an exaggeration, but it's exaggeration to make it artificial, opposite of lifelike. So if you like Mexican telenovelas where the person falls down dead and they're lying there for 3 minutes and then the wife says, oh, I think I'm ready to remarry. And the guy gets up and says, I'm still alive. And then he falls and dies again. That is over the top theatricality to get it across. So we do see it in telenovelas and things along those lines, particularly in the theater scene where you have to overact so people can see you from a distance and know what you mean from a distance. So if you look at these particular art forms, the activity we'll do in class is the following. You will look through each one of these to determine what are the visual representations and styles of each one of these. Spear bearer, is it abstraction? Is it classical, expressionism, idealism, naturalism, non-objective, realism, theatricality? And we will do that for each one. Now note, many of these will have far more than one because they can be manipulated. Remember, whenever you have naturalism, you default by you have realism. When you have expressionism, you will often have theatricality. And that's why when you look at these, which concepts are you likely to find in the same artwork? That's why they were color-coded at the beginning. Classical and idealism show up a lot. Abstraction and non-objective show up a lot. Theatricality and expressionism show up a lot. And classical and idealism show up on a lot together. So the next thing you're going to do is the aesthetic analysis of this artwork. What is the message here that Picasso is trying to get about by depicting women in this particular format, these 5 women? What's the emotional impact? What's the intellectual impact? And how does the artist do this using the elements of design? If you can do that, you can do an aesthetic analysis. And that's the ultimate goal. It gets easier as you go forward. The other thing that I like about the aesthetic analysis is it activates more parts of your brain trying to figure out what an artwork means than almost any other question that we can ask. So when we do brain studies where we highlight how the brain interacts, the brain lights up enormously when we do aesthetic analysis on what an artwork means, particularly if it's not clear from the very get-go. And so there's only one question in the history of humanity so far that we have found that lights up the brain more than, hey, what is the meaning of this artwork? Any guesses what that one question is? That is correct. It's a philosophical question that says, what is the meaning of life? That is the one question that actually lights up more than the brain than actually doing an aesthetic analysis where you have to combine all those different elements together. Good job. Another one we can do an aesthetic analysis on, but once you learn how to do it, you can apply this to any movie, any TV ad, any video game, and see how you're being manipulated, because now you know the basics of how you're being manipulated. Line, color, form, shape, and texture, the design elements, are being used to create visual representations of the world to get you to do something, to get you to think in a new way, feel in a new way, buy something that you wouldn't have otherwise bought. It's basically a manipulation. That's what art is, what art has always been. We can use it for positive or negative ends. Negative ends, we often call it propaganda. Positive ends, we call it protest or social motivation art out of Goyo and other individuals. But both can be used for both good and bad. And we see this in advertisements all the time. The last message, the last thing I want to talk to you today very briefly about is our technique for the week. For those of you that have trouble getting your work started, I highly recommend watching the video, and there will be a question this week on the video called the Pomodoro technique. It's a way of trying to overcome procrastination if you really do it. And so here's what you're going to do. You're going to set a timer. Well, first you're going to find yourself a nice task that you really want to do well on, something that you need to sit down and do. You're going to remove all distractions. That's really the key. Remove all distractions. Turn the cell phone off. Unless you're working on the computer, turn off Facebook, internet, anything else you want, pop-ups, turn them all off so you can concentrate. You're going to set a timer. This says 25 minutes. I would recommend the first time setting it for 20 minutes. And then no matter what happens, you will sit down and you will work for those 20 minutes. Even if you get nothing done, you are going to sit there. You can't say, oh, after 5 minutes, oh, I'm frustrated, I need a snack. You need to have that all taken care of beforehand. Let your parents and no one else interrupt you. Don't accept any cell phone calls. Don't listen to any beep. You need to have all that off so it doesn't distract your attention. And what we find is the first 5 minutes might be hard. Maybe minute 8 is hard, minute 9. But by minute 10, most people think, all right, I'm in this. I'm going to start to work. And then when you are done with your 20 or 25 minutes, you either can reward yourself, take a 5-minute break and do it again. Or alternatively, you might want to continue on one more strand, because the hardest part about starting the work for procrastination is just starting the work, getting up. Once you get going, most people are pretty good with continuing on, provided they understand the assignment. So that's called the Pomodoro technique. I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. It's worked for numerous students, and it works not just for my class. We work for any class or any assignment or anything that you need to do, even if you're nervous about making a phone call. Just say, hey, in the next 25 minutes, I'm going to make this phone call. And that's where we are. The elements of design, color, line, form, scale, and texture, to manipulate your different visual depictions of the world, to manipulate the people to think, feel, and do, buy things in a new way. That is what an aesthetic analysis is from an artist's perspective. You all can do it. You will get better at it. And once you do it, it will help you with your own artwork, because then you'll start thinking consciously about, how am I trying to manipulate my audience? What do I want them to think, feel, see about within the process? Good luck. Have a wonderful day.